Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Mike Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, May the 5th, 2021. So, Donald Trump silenced by social media, but will he remain silenced forever? It's a story from Breitbart by Joshua Kaplan. Appearing Tuesday on Yahoo Financial Live, Twitter CFO Ned Siegel reaffirmed that the social network giant will never reverse its blacklisting of former President Donald Trump. Siegel's pledge came ahead of the Facebook Oversight Board's decision to uphold its ban on the former president's account. Siegel said, "There has been no changes to anything we have shared in the past around the former president's account. When you step back and think about our policies, we want to work hard to be consistent, to be transparent, so people know exactly what to expect from us. We don't have an oversight board like Facebook. Our team is accountable for the decisions that we make. There is no changes to anything we have talked about in the past." Twitter permanently blacklisted Donald Trump's account on January the 8th, 2021. The move came after Facebook and Instagram indefinitely blacklisted Trump. This is from CNBC. Lauren Feiner and Salvador Rodriguez. Facebook's independent oversight board ruled Wednesday to uphold the company's January decision to suspend the Facebook and Instagram accounts of former President Donald Trump. But the board said the indefinite time frame of the suspension was not appropriate. The board effectively punted the decision on the length of the suspension back to Facebook, saying it insists the company review this matter to determine and justify a proportionate response that is consistent with the rules that are applied to other users of its platform. The board asked that Facebook complete its review within 6 months and made suggestions for how to create clear policies that balance public safety and freedom of expression. Trump responded to the decision, and I will get to that shortly. Meanwhile, Kara Swisher, who is an angry lesbian dwarf, is absolutely furious with Facebook. She has a column in the New York Times today, "Good riddance, Donald Trump." She begins, "It never occurred to me that a Facebook-appointed panel could avoid a clear decision about Donald Trump's heinous online behavior, but that is what it has done." Over the next days, we will hear a lot of huffing and puffing about the Oversight Board's decision to uphold a ban on former President Donald Trump from Facebook. That is appropriate, since the question of how to treat speech on social media platforms is a major and perhaps impossible one to wrangle with, especially when it comes to important political figures who relish in being divisive. Oh, a political figure being divisive. This must be a first in American history. Swisher continues, which is why the external board decided to punt the fetid Trump situation back to the Facebook leadership. It's kind of perfect, actually, since it forces everyone's hand, from Facebook chief executive Mark Zuckerberg to our limp legislators in Congress. In general, I would consider the case of Trump to be much less complex than people seem to think, and has been made to appear highly complicated by big tech companies like Facebook because they want to exhaust us all in a noisy and intractable debate. Trump should be seen as an outlier. Boo! A lone, long-time rule breaker who was coddled and protected on social media platforms until he wandered into seditious territory. He's an unrepentant gamer of Facebook's badly enforced rules who will never change. He got away with it for years and spread myriad self-serving lies far and wide. So why should Trump stop now? One way to answer that would be to ask why so many Republicans believe the big lie that President Biden was not elected fairly, or why do so many of the same people resist COVID-19 vaccinations? And I'll have a lot more on that shortly. It's all because of the inexhaustible Trump digital army, which is both organized and scattered and has been enabled by social media companies. The Reddit chief executive, Steve Huffman, called the behavior of these pro-Trump forces malicious compliance, which means totally non-compliant, in an interview with me earlier this year. And that's the reason he finally and correctly threw some trumpets off the platform. For a long time, Reddit was one of the most vehement defenders of any and all speech on tech platforms. That is, until it was clear that Reddit was being played by idiots by trolls. Trump and his acolytes spent years crossing lines in the digital sand. He's good at it. And now he's paying the price for his social media success by being rendered silent, at least as silent as a loudmouth can be. And of course, no one has ever accused Kara Swisher of being a loud mouth. In his various and sundry heinous behaviors, Trump has been explicit and his intent has been relatively clear, i.e. to anger the media, to lie repeatedly, to monger fear, or fearmonger, as others might say, to make stupid jokes at the expense of others. Oh, here we have Kara Swisher, the final arbiter of what counts as a good joke, to wink and then nod to the base, which of course is something that no politicians, other politicians, ever do. I can't get the phrase arbiter of truth out of my head, Swisher says. I just believe strongly that Facebook shouldn't be the arbiter of truth of everything that people say online, Zuckerberg said in an interview with Fox News in 2020. Private companies probably shouldn't be, especially these platform companies shouldn't be in the position of doing that. Zuckerberg, according to Swisher, was trying to wrangle out of making the hard decision about Trump that the head of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, eventually made when he permanently banned the president. Here are some questions I would ask the Facebook chief if given the chance. Why build a platform that requires an arbiter of truth if you don't want to be one? Could you not have foreseen the inevitable endpoint of that position? Did you trust too much that the community would sort out truth from lies? Yes, only Kara Swisher and people who think like her are capable of sorting out truth from lies. Yes, it's going to be an endless and exhausting game of hot potato in which no one wins. Good riddance to Trump? Hardly. Yes, apparently there's some difficulty about permanently silencing a man who was president of the United States until 3 months ago. And yes, we have a thumbsucker, as they say in the biz, by Greg Bensinger from the New York Times, called a verdict in Facebook's show trial. In the end, they passed the buck. The whole farce highlights the fatuousness of having a quasi-court assist a multinational corporation in making business decisions. Its members may be deliberative, earnest, and thoughtful, but the oversight board cannot compel Facebook to make underlying policy changes nor set meaningful precedent about moderation. Its remit is only to decide whether specific posts should remain on the site or be removed. Helle Thorning-Schmidt, an oversight board co-chair and former prime minister of Denmark, sought to bolster the body's importance. Anyone who is concerned about Facebook's excessive concentration of power should welcome the oversight board clearly telling Facebook that they cannot invent new unwritten rules when it suits them. All of this may be moot for this reason, that Trump has gone solo, that he has an account, donaldjtrump.com/desk, from the desk of Donald J. Trump. Oh, and here there are a bunch of messages up here. Quite a few. This is from May the 3rd. So nice to see Rhino Mitt Romney booed off the stage at the Utah Republican State Convention. They are among the earliest to have figured this guy out, a stone-cold loser. From May the 3rd. Heartwarming to read new polls on big shot warmonger Liz Cheney of the great state of Wyoming. She is so low that her only chance would be if vast numbers of people run against her, which hopefully won't happen. They never liked her much, but I say she'll never run in a Wyoming election again. More on Liz Cheney. from President Trump today. Warmonger Liz Cheney, who has virtually no support left in the great state of Wyoming, continues to unknowingly and foolishly say, and I'm not going to repeat this. Had Mike Pence referred the information on 6 states, only need 2, back to the state legislatures, and had gutless and clueless Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, he blew 2 seats in Georgia that should never have been lost, fought to expose what was found at the time and more since, we would have had a far different, and I won't say that, and our country would not be turning into a socialist nightmare. Never give up. Again, from today, from President Trump, what Facebook, Twitter, and Google have done is a total disgrace and embarrassment to our country. Free speech has been taken away from the President of the United States because the radical left lunatics are afraid of the truth. But the truth will come out anyway, bigger and stronger than ever before. The people of our country will not stand for it. These corrupt social media companies must pay a political price. And finally, from Trump today, there may be more later on. Perhaps he's just getting started. Liz Cheney is a warmongering fool who has no business in Republican Party leadership. We want leaders who believe in the Make America Great Again movement and prioritize the values of America first. Elise Stefanik is a far superior choice, and she has my complete and total endorsement for GOP conference chair. Elise is a tough and smart communicator. Yes, well, Trump is a tough and smart communicator. Chaining Liz Cheney to this word warmongering is, that's a masterstroke, because she is a warmonger who is determined to ensnare America in forever wars all over the globe. Finally, on this topic, from the Citizen Free Press, Mark Meadows, who is a former member of the House of Representatives and was a Trump chief of staff from 2020 to 2021, comments on the situation. It's a sad day for America. It's a sad day for Facebook, because I can tell you a number of members of Congress are now looking at, do they break up Facebook? Do they make sure they don't have a monopoly? Meadows asked rhetorically on America's Newsroom on Fox. And I can tell you it's 2 different standards, one for Donald Trump and one for a number of other people that are on their sites and suggesting more nefarious things than what the president has been accused of actually go unnoticed often. When you look at Google and Facebook, Meadows continues, they have more power over what we read and what we see than any in the media. Google and Facebook and YouTube actually control much of what America sees, whether it's you and I talking right now and it gets reposted on any of those platforms. They have the ability to actually raise that profile or lower it. And so it is time that we break up big tech, not just regulate it. On Trump's site, I noticed there were buttons which supposedly allow you to link his posts to Facebook and to Twitter. I haven't tried it. I'm just wondering whether these tweets will be removed or hidden, or I would be suspended if I did so. I guess I'll give it a go a little later. Let's have a look at the chat. Hello to Dan, Palpicasso88, Quachalongo, Geez He Style, Yo Mama. Tricky Who says, did you get your special juice yet? The KMG show says, oh yeah, it's free. No, I have not. And my position on this is I'm not going to do so until I am forced to do so. We are getting more and more information about these mRNA vaccines, which is close to terrifying, actually. I don't plan on traveling anywhere. I don't have the money to do so, even if I wanted to. If it becomes necessary for me to get the jab such that, I won't starve to death, if I'm going to be locked out of, say, grocery stores, yeah, that's the only possibility. Okay. Hello to Head McNeck. Metal Mike says, Angry Lesbian Dwarf. Great name for a Riot Girl band. How about Angry Lesbian Dwarf Star? Wouldn't that be even better? Gamiston says, the council will decide your fate. Hello to William Hicks. Roulette Crack says, smuggling up with KMG, fam, my emotional support blanket. Well, thank you for that. Chogokin666 says, Bush, illegal war criminal, torture, quasi-dictator, never impeached. Trump, of course, and impeached twice. GC Style says, Trump isn't president, but New York Times is still hysterical over him. Their vaccine should include Valium. Well, yes, they could have taken the W and moved on. But no, Donald Trump hasn't been, and his supporters haven't been, well, destroyed. First silenced, then destroyed. The Democrats pretty close to saying that any Trump supporter, anyone who voted for him in 2016 or 2020, is a traitor to America, and of course, a white supremacist. William Hicks says, monger fear or mongering fear. Monger fearing? Adam says, the silencing of Trump only plays into his myth. It's epic. The outsider president in exile. I love it. Hello to Gamian. Yes, Gamiston, living rent-free in their heads. The memory holding is quickening to a frenzied pace. Can they keep up, says Roulette Cracked. But he says we are down 15 runs and the opponents are still stealing bases on us. Was there any talk about fomenting, says William Hicks? Oh, yes, this insurrection. The insurrection where the people at the Capitol didn't bring weapons. And the insurrection when they went home after Trump said that they must. Funny kind of insurrection. Okay. Yorgi Starkov says the best thing he could do now would be to flip-flop on the January 6th freedom fighters and talk about how they're being tortured in a special political prison for trespassing. William Hicks says YouTube and Facebook's control is illusory. There are numerous alternatives. Gamion says, I wonder if they'll take away from us even grocery delivery without the vax. It's possible. It is possible. And moving on to the winner, the official winner of the 2016 presidential election, which would be Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., a strange photo was posted to Twitter and elsewhere, which is kind of terrifying. Are President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden, are they giants? Does the vaccine give people gigantism? Because there's a picture of them with Jimmy Carter, former President Jimmy Carter, and his wife Rosalind. And they appear to be twice their size. They look as if they're about to devour them, perhaps by pulling their heads off. And here's something else. They are as close as this, but they're not wearing masks. No one is wearing a mask in this photo. So does Joe Biden believe that people should wear masks or not? In State of the Union address, everyone in the room was vaccinated and everyone but him was wearing a mask nonetheless. In his climate crisis Zoom chat 2 weeks ago, Biden was wearing a mask on a Zoom chat. No one else was wearing a mask. This is this picture with the Carters is only the latest of some very strange Biden iconography. Well, not to mention Kamala Harris iconography as well. So we need an explainer from popular science. By now, you've probably seen the picture of the President and First Lady Biden hanging out, that's a weird choice of phrase, with former President and First Lady Carter. It's notable for its historic aspects, but it also looks plain weird. The Bidens dwarf the Carters, who are sitting in oversized armchairs. It seems almost photoshopped. I've already seen a few explanations kicking around attributing the weirdness to a wide-angle lens, but that's only part of the story. Yes, the photographer almost certainly used a wide-angle lens like a Nikon 14 to 24 millimeter or a Canon 16 to 35 millimeter zoom. Both are extremely popular with photojournalists who typically like to get close to their subjects and often need to shoot in tight spaces. When you shoot with a wide-angle lens, you're going to get some distortion. You've probably already experienced this, but if not, fire up your phone's ultra-wide camera, if it has one, and take a close-up picture of your face. Your nose will be enormous and your ears will fall away in the background. It's not very flattering unless you're going for the Johnny Depp in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas look. Super wide-angle lenses rarely make for flattering portraits, especially up close. That's in part because of the optical distortion inherent to the lens itself. Light from the very edges of the frame enters the lens at an extreme angle. Pick an object in your room that's off to one side. It should be 70 degrees rather than 90 from your line of vision. Now hold your smartphone or any other camera directly to your eye. The sensor that catches the light will sit parallel with your face straight ahead. Imagine the path light bouncing off of your off-center subject has to take to make it to that sensor. It's a seriously sharp turn. And there's much more of this, but did no one vet this photo before it was sent out by the Carter Center? I saw someone comment on this. The more I look at it, the scarier it gets. And here's another explainer. This one from Business Insider. Erin Snodgrass. A photo of Joe and Joe Biden meeting with Jimmy and Rosalind Carter last week has puzzled the internet. The Bidens appear to tower over the former first couple in a photo taken at the Carters' Georgia home. A specific photography method and the framing of the photo are likely responsible for the oddity. The internet was set ablaze Monday evening after former President Jimmy Carter and First Lady Rosalind Carter's nonprofit, the Carter Center, shared a curious-looking photo of President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden posing with the former first couple last week in Georgia. In Georgia, looking like something out of a house of oddities, both Bidens appear to tower considerably over the Carters, who look like miniature figures seated in their chairs. The photo seems to suggest that the Bidens are twice as large as the nonagenarian couple. Jimmy Carter's height is listed at 5'10", while Biden is 2 inches taller. Rosalind Carter, meanwhile, measures up at 5'5", about 1 inch shorter than Joe Biden, who is 5'6". So if the Bidens aren't giants and the Carters aren't tiny, what accounts for the bizarre photo? A specific photography method and the framing of the photo are likely responsible for the illusion, according to the Washington Post and BBC News. Marlena Sloss, a freelance photographer, told the Post that a strong flash also contributed to the effect. The flash reduces shadows, which play a role in giving photographed objects depth. That's curious to me, because I recall reading years ago that when Sidney Pollack was working on Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, Pollack, of course, was an accomplished director himself, but he asked Stanley Kubrick for lessons in still photography. Kubrick had been a well-known still photographer before he got into films, and one of the pieces of advice that Kubrick gave to Sidney Pollack was never use a flash. Which I can't remember the name of a famous English portrait photographer who famously never used a flash, and if there wasn't enough light in the room, she simply took a lamp and put it to the side of the person that she was photographing, and she won all sorts of awards, and there are many of her pictures that reside in museums. So, yeah. Here's an alternative explanation. The Carters, Jimmy Carter was of course famously memorialized by The Simpsons as history's greatest monster. He was seen as weak and humiliated by Iran. And of course, there was his famous or infamous malaise speech. And as Hank Hill once noted, the man wore a sweater. Could it be that the Bidens arranged this deliberately in order to make a contrast, a very strong contrast between the putatively weak Carters and the absolutely strong Bidens? possible. I mean, stranger things have happened. Metal Mike says, oh my God, I just saw this photo. Chogokin666 says, wow, that is odd. Gamayun says, WTF. Quachalango says, KMG should make a class chat photo like this. Jim Smith says, well, Joe certainly didn't look like a decrepit, senile old man. No. Adam says, it's just a photo, no occult message to be deciphered. Well, perhaps, it's just there have been so many examples of this, of Joe supposedly passing through a boom microphone. And of course, Kamala taking the stairs to nowhere. Why? Why was she walking up a flight of stairs to nowhere? A flight of airline stairs. It must be hard to be a member of the mendacious class, always deflecting, explaining, says David Wright. I'll say one thing about Joe Biden. He struck me as being quite a well-dressed man. And of course, since have you ever seen pictures of him from the 70s, the 80s, with his conspicuous mullet? It's absolutely hilarious. People say that Donald Trump is vain, and of course he is, but Joe Biden is much more so. Okay. There's a video of him from the 1970s where he's talking about prostituting himself politically, says Goose. I'm sure the Carters have shrunk a bit, as very old people do, says Ann Run. Yeah, I'm sure that is so. But yeah, there's just, I would use this phrase uncanny valley effect yesterday with regard to K-pop. And this is really, you really see that in that photograph. Hello to Tom Anderson. I think Carter may have been the most wholesome president of the modern era, says Chogokin666. Well, he did give that weird interview to Playboy magazine in 1976. Now, you know, would a wholesome man give an interview to Playboy magazine? I know a lot of respectable people have given interviews to Playboy magazine, including Martin Luther King. But he made that strange statement about having committed adultery in his heart. That's none of our business, okay? He, yes, wore sweaters. Such a nice man. Well, he wasn't. When he was in the Georgia legislature, his nickname was the Honey Badger. And the Honey Badger, well, have you seen the famous video of the Honey Badger? It's been viewed, 80 million times or something? The Honey Badger is the most ferocious animal on Earth. Tom Anderson says, KMG, have you heard about the new Humans of the CIA recruitment videos? Yes, I talked about that last week. It's been widely mocked, but the woke people are now coming to the defense of the CIA, which is pretty funny. This is from Stephen Nelson at the New York Post. President Biden on Tuesday called for patience after leaving Americans confused about whether to continue wearing masks amid CDC guidance that vaccinated people have no reason to continue wearing the COVID-19 shields. Biden has been erratic in his embrace of the CDC's pivot, drawing ridicule from critics who say Democrats hypocritically accuse them of not following science during the pandemic. There's a video of Joe Biden from yesterday or 2 days ago. He is walking out the front door of a building, and he has been inside, and he wasn't wearing a mask. When he's outside, he puts a mask on. Is this just, did he forget? Did he just get things backwards? Which reminds me, I was walking around my neighborhood a couple of hours ago, and I saw a man, in his 30s, I would guess, and he was wearing a windbreaker, and he had sewed on it, or he'd got someone else to sew it on or iron it on, a big patch that said NASA, you know, that National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and he was wearing a mask. on a typically windy Victoria day. But, science. Back to the New York Post. The president noted tensions over the issue as residents of some major cities, such as Washington, D.C., largely flout the new CDC advice and continue wearing masks on empty sidewalks. Yes, I should mention the science fellow with the NASA patch. He was walking alone. There was no one with him. Even though 41% of U.S. adults are fully vaccinated and 56% have had at least one shot. The good news is that last week the CDC said that vaccinated people do not need to wear their masks outside. What kind of morons were wearing masks outside to begin with? But never mind. Unless they're in very crowded settings like a sporting event, Biden said at a White House event. And if we can continue to drive vaccination up and caseloads down, we'll need our masks even less and less. Biden added it will take time to get everything back to normal. We're all going to have to be patient with one another. Masks have needlessly divided this country. Masking as directed is a patriotic duty, but so too is treating each other with respect and patience. Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, who both are fully vaccinated, continued to wear masks last week in instances where they did not need to after the CDC changed course. The president stood unmasked on a largely empty rally stage Thursday evening near Atlanta as his wife introduced him. Yes, there's another very strange thing about Joe Biden. His campaign, even as president, people like to see the president of the United States. I mean, if for nothing else, then he is one of the most famous men on earth. But when Joe Biden appears in public, there's nobody ever there, which of course has led to suggestions that he is actually a hologram. Oh, and more mask weirdness. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A video clip shows Vice President Kamala Harris kissing her husband while both are wearing masks, with both also having received the vaccination. Totally normal. I should point out that they are both outside. The clip shows Harris saying goodbye to her husband as she boards a flight, but not before kissing him through the fabric of their face coverings. Despite CDC guidelines saying vaccinated people can stop wearing masks outside, Biden administration officials continue to do so, once again illustrating how the mask has become a political symbol. Biden also embarrassed himself during a recent speech to supporters in Georgia when he had a near panic attack because he couldn't find his mask. Last week, a man was kicked off a Southwest Airlines flight because he didn't wear his mask in between eating bites of food, which according to the TSA is now a federal mandate. The insanity shows no sign of ending anytime soon. So masks forever. How about jabs forever? You notice how this has been sneaking up on us? Oh, one jab. Okay. No, but you need two. But is two enough? Well, we'll see. This is from Berkeley Loveless Jr. at CNBC. Pfizer scientists expect elderly, people with underlying conditions, to be first to get COVID vaccine booster shots. High-risk groups such as the elderly and people with underlying medical conditions are expected to be first in line to get COVID vaccine booster shots, a Pfizer executive told investors Tuesday. Executives at Pfizer and BioNTech previously said people will likely need a booster shot or third dose within 12 months of getting fully vaccinated. They also said it's likely people will need to get additional shots each year. During an earnings call Tuesday, Michael Dolston, Pfizer's chief scientific officer, said it makes sense to start with those most susceptible to severe illness. Now we're hearing talk about needing to get a booster shot every 6 months. That's obviously good news for Pfizer and BioNTech, wouldn't you say? And the Daily Mail is also covering this story. This is from Sam Blanchard and Henry Martin. COVID will be treatable like flu next year. Vaccine minister, yes, and Britain has a vaccine minister, says jabs will stop another crisis unfolding with all over 50 set to get third doses to see virus fade away by Christmas, as experts say lockdowns may never be needed again. SAGE advisor Professor Neil Ferguson, who is still being quoted as an expert for some reason, said he thinks this is unlikely that lockdown rules will have to remain. Public Health England, soon to be the UK Health Security Agency, will invest in future-proof variant testing. Yep, you just can't get enough jabs to change your molecular structure. And gotta have those protein spikes. There's no end to it. And, business is upset about vaccines because the drug companies are not responsible for anything that goes wrong. For instance, debilitating illnesses or people suffering miscarriages or people dying. This is from Engineering News Record. New guidance from the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration is causing contractors to change their COVID-19 vaccine requirements, and many of them criticize the guidance as diametrically opposed to the Biden administration's stated desire to increase vaccinations. On April 20th, OSHA released the new guidance in the frequently asked questions section of its website for COVID-19 safety compliance. The question asked whether an employer should record adverse reactions to COVID-19 vaccination if the employer requires the vaccine. OSHA states that if a vaccine is required, then any adverse reaction is considered work-related, and therefore it must be recorded. In response, several large contractors say they have changed or will change their vaccination policy to only recommend, not require, a vaccine. We sadly had to back off on our employee vaccination mandate because OSHA did something I don't understand, said Bob Clark, founder and executive chairman of Clayco. I side with OSHA frequently, and we're in its VIP program, but on this, they're just wrong. It's a terrible decision they've made, and I think it'll be overturned. Well, it does not seem like a terrible decision to me. If an employer says you must get an experimental drug and then something bad happens, well, it's the responsibility of the company that forced this on you. Is it not? I really don't see how anyone could, in good faith or good conscience, disagree with this mandate. Sports was having a hard time before COVID-19, but I guess it's never going to be the same. Baseball. This is again from Paul Joseph Wesson of Summit News. Unvaccinated people are to be segregated from those who have received the COVID-19 jab at New York Yankees and Mets games, it has been revealed. Governor Andrew Cuomo announced the news in a tweet, adding that capacities will be reduced to 33% in unvaccinated areas to comply with CDC social distancing rules. All fans will be forced to wear face masks, despite CDC guidelines stating that those who have received the vaccine should no longer have to wear the masks outside. Is he trying to kill baseball in New York City? I'd want to sit with the unvaccinated people, frankly, because the vaccinated people who have got the vaccinations and are wearing a mask outdoors, their irrationality frightens me. And I wouldn't want to be in close proximity to them. Cuomo provided no details on how fans would prove they have been vaccinated before attending the game. This represents the beginning of a de facto domestic vaccine passport for Americans. While unvaccinated fans will be allowed to attend games, albeit in a segregated area, there's no guarantee they won't be prevented from entering stadiums in the near future when the vaccine has been offered to everybody. The segregation policy is also being implemented by other countries, including Hong Kong, where unvaccinated people are seated in different areas of restaurants and restricted to a total of 4 people per table. Respondents to Cuomo's announcement expressed a mixture of sentiments, with some saying unvaccinated people should be barred altogether, while others complaining they won't be able to bring their unvaccinated kids to the game. Others pointed out that the policy is straight up segregation and will only end in disaster. Someone called Giselle, yes, of course, that's what she's called, Giselle Thompson Fry, says unvaccinated should have nosebleeder seats. They're not called nosebleeder seats, they're called nosebleed seats. Who is going to enforce the mask rules? Will there be cops removing the offenders? Again, it's all a bad idea. You need to understand it's not going to turn out well. So easy to jumpstart a new variant to COVID and kill more people. Who is this person? I'm a liberal fighting against Trump and his evil party. My dream is to have a nonprofit rescue dog sanctuary and to be on a liberal radio show with John Cusack. Okay, we all have our dreams. Oh, and yeah. Does the Canadian government want to force the Toronto Blue Jays out of Toronto permanently? This is from the Canadian Press today. The Blue Jays will play home games in Buffalo, New York for the second year in a row because of COVID-19 restrictions. The Blue Jays say they will call Solon Field home starting June the 1st. The stadium in the border city normally is home to the Blue Jays AAA affiliate, but the Bisons have temporarily moved to Trenton, New Jersey. Toronto has started the season playing home games at the team's spring training facility in Dunedin, Florida. You know how small those stadia are? I mean, the Blue Jays are obviously taking an enormous financial hit, and there's seemingly no end in sight. The Blue Jays played in Buffalo in front of no fans for most home games in last year's shortened season. Toronto made the expanded playoffs to qualify for postseason play for the first time since 2016 before being swept by the Tampa Bay Rays. The Blue Jays say fans aged 3 and older must present proof of full vaccination or a negative COVID-19 test within 72 hours of the game. Yeah, and I bet a lot of people are going to jump through all those hoops to watch a baseball game that one can watch on TV. Are they still going to be charging the outrageous prices for seats, and food, and drink? Are they? Sean Boynton of Global News reports that Canada is seeing a mental health crisis, but more are willing to discuss it. So it's a bad news, good news story, is it? The number of Canadians experiencing mental health issues continues to rise across the country amid the COVID-19 pandemic. A new Ipsos poll suggests, with half of those surveyed being deemed at high risk. Yet the poll also found an increasing number of people, 53%, are willing to discuss their issues with family health professionals or publicly on social media. Yes, I want this broken down by sex, okay? That number is a large jump from when Ipsos last polled the public on their experiences with mental health in April 2018, when only 41% of Canadians said they had discussed their issues. It's really encouraging, said Jennifer McLeod-Macy, Vice President of Ipsos Public Affairs. We want people to be talking about this. We want to end the stigma, but at the same time, we are in a bit of crisis mode. What business is it to the Vice President of a polling company whether people want to discuss their mental health issues in public or not? The number of Canadians at high risk, meaning they've experienced some combination of debilitating stress, hopeless depression, and consideration of suicide or self-harm, is at the highest point since Ipsos began its polling in 2015. Nearly 1 in 10 Canadians seriously considered suicide or self-harm several times over the past year. The poll suggests, while 13% considered it at least once. Yes, we must erase the stigma. Well, mental illness is stigmatized for a good reason, and everyone knows what those reasons are. Apparently, it's not bad enough that increasing numbers of people are suffering from severe mental health issues, but they have to talk to everyone about it all the time. Geez, you think with all of the people on antidepressants, these numbers would be going down, wouldn't you? And, okay, more news from Canada. From John Iveson at the National Post, Hajdu, and this is Patty Hajdu, who is Canada's Minister of Health, fails to walk the line on COVID vaccines after advisory committee's muddled message. If I were Trudeau, I would be expressing a lack of confidence in my health minister right about now, a repeat offender when it comes to putting her foot in it. Politics and Journalism writes, Iveson shared the dubious distinction of being activities where no prior experience is considered necessary. You could be, say, a teacher and end up as prime minister, or a graphic designer who becomes health minister. What you do need, though, is an ability to walk the line. The COVID vaccine progress in Canada was threatened by the muddled recommendation issued by the National Advisory Committee on Immunization this week. In a press conference that should be studied by future generations of communicators for its epic incongruity, Chair Caroline Quach-Fan and Vice Chair Shelley Deeks pointed out that while the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is highly efficacious at preventing critical illness and hospitalization, it also carries some risk. There have been 17 cases of blood clots from the 8 million doses administered in the U.S. Well, that statement is false. It's lazy writing at best, and it is deliberately misleading at worst. There have been 17 cases of blood clots so far reported, and the VAERS system, it's all self-reporting, and the backlog is enormous. In any event, consequently, the Advisory Council recommended it only be offered to individuals over 30 who preferred an earlier vaccination rather than waiting for Pfizer or Moderna mRNA shots. NACI previously expressed its reservations about another viral vector-based vaccine produced by AstraZeneca, suggesting it should not be given to those older than 65. A later recommendation stated AstraZeneca should not be given to anyone under 55. Both recommendations contradicted Health Canada's position that the vaccine should be given to anyone older than 18. It appears we have dueling experts, dueling scientists. In media interviews late in the day, Quach-Fan, a professor at the Université de Montréal, added a note of alarm to the confusion. If my sister was to get the AstraZeneca vaccine and then died of thrombosis when I knew it could have been prevented, I'm not sure I could live with it, she told CTV's Power Play. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. So here we have a top expert saying that the AstraZeneca vaccine is risky. Here's a piece from National Newswatch, which is a deep state organ in my country. Could vaccine-resistant variants turn North America and Europe into gated communities? Now we're cheering for the variants. The media is cheering. Go, come on, variants. We need more variants. We need the panic to remain forever. This is by Don Lenihan and Andrew Balfour. Last Friday, Ontario Premier Doug Ford declared that if Pearson Airport were under his control, he would shut it down. Meanwhile, Federal Health Minister Patty Hajdu was talking up Ottawa's plans to create vaccine passports so that Canadians can start traveling again. It's a curious conjunction of a deepening crisis and rising optimism. It may also be an early sign of a more complicated future in which international travel, like the virus, is mutating. When Canadian politicians talk openly about how variants can increase transmission or even make the virus more deadly, they have tiptoed around the subject of vaccine-resistant variants, and it's not hard to see why. Where's the expert? Where's the evidence here that these variants are deadlier and more communicable? But no, the variants The variants are going to be used as an excuse for keeping the sanitary dictatorship rolling forever. Unless there's a rebellion against it, which is always possible. Emma Green in The Atlantic has a piece, The Liberals Who Can't Quit Lockdown. Progressive communities have been home to some of the fiercest battles over COVID-19 policies, and some liberal policymakers have left scientific evidence behind. And there's a picture of teachers in Massachusetts protesting a school opening plan. And there's a woman wearing some sort of, it looks like some sort of cheap version of a hazmat suit. And she's wearing a mask and she's wearing a visor on top of it. And she's holding up paper with things written on them, as women are now wont to do. Hashtag only when it's safe. Hashtag my first day of school outfit. So Emma Green begins, lurking among the jubilant Americans venturing back out to bars and planning their summer wedding travel is a different group. Liberals who aren't quite ready to let go of pandemic restrictions. For this subset, diligence against COVID-19 remains an expression of political identity, even when that means overestimating the disease's risks or setting limits far more strict than what public health guidelines permit. In surveys, Democrats express more worry about the pandemic than Republicans do. People who describe themselves as very liberal are distinctly anxious, and I'd like to see this broken down as well by sex. This spring, after the vaccine rollout had started, a third of very liberal people were very concerned about becoming seriously ill from COVID-19, compared with a quarter of both liberals and moderates, according to a study conducted by the University of North Carolina. And 43% of very liberal respondents believed that getting the coronavirus would have a, quote, very bad effect on their life, compared with a third of liberals and moderates. Last year, when the pandemic was raging and scientists and public health officials were still trying to understand how the virus spread, extreme care was warranted. People all over the country made enormous sacrifices, rescheduling weddings, missing funerals, canceling graduations, avoiding the family members they love to protect others. Some conservatives refused to wear masks or stay home because of skepticism about the severity of the disease or a refusal to give up their freedoms. But this is a different story about progressives who stressed the scientific evidence and then veered away for it. For many progressives, extreme vigilance was in part about opposing Donald Trump. That's a remarkable admission for someone at The Atlantic to make. Some of this reaction was born of deeply felt frustration with how he handled the pandemic. It could also be knee-jerk. If he said, keep schools open, then, well, we're going to do everything in our power to keep schools closed, Monica Gandhi, a professor of medicine at UC San Francisco, told me. Gandhi describes herself as left of left, but has alienated some of her ideological peers because she has advocated for policies such as reopening schools and establishing a clear timeline for the end of mask mandates. We went the other way in an extreme way against Trump's politicization, Gandhi said. Geography and personality may have also contributed to progressives' caution. Some of the most liberal parts of the country are places where the pandemic hit especially hard, and Hetherington found that the very liberal participants in his survey tended to be the most neurotic. Oh, you mean like New Jersey and New York, which had the strictest lockdowns in America? The spring of 2020 is different from the spring of 2021 is different from the spring of 2020, though. Scientists know a lot more about how COVID-19 spreads and how it doesn't. Public health advice is shifting. Yes, but some progressives have not updated their behavior based on the new information, and in their eagerness to protect themselves and others, they may be underestimating other costs. Being extra careful about COVID-19 is mostly harmless when it's limited to wiping down your groceries with Lysol wipes and wearing a mask in places where you're unlikely to spread the coronavirus, such as on a hiking trail. But vigilance can have unintended consequences when it imposes on other people's lives. Even as scientific knowledge of COVID-19 has increased, some progressives have continued to embrace policies and behaviors that aren't supported by evidence, such as banning access to playgrounds, closing beaches, and refusing to reopen schools for in-person learning. Well, we were told a year ago that the coronavirus could live on surfaces for up to 9 days. So you got to wash your hands 50 times a day. Then was about 4 months ago, the health authorities admitted that's not true. It's not spread that way. And this was only publicized, about a couple of weeks ago? But, wash your hands, use sanitizer, and all the rest of it. It's still going on, even though the science has revealed to us that it's not necessary. But I guess you can't be too careful. But as I've pointed out on this live stream, there are some experts who fear that this mania for sterilization is going to lead to a population that has no natural immune response. Let's see how this story ends. Okay. Dr. Doom. Oh, okay. And so as the rest of vaccinated America begins its summer of bacchanalia, rescheduling long-awaited dinner parties and medium-sized weddings, the most hardcore pandemic progressives are left Cassandra-like to preach their peers' folly. Every day, Zachary Loeb publishes 4 plague poems on Twitter, little missives about the headlines and how it feels to live through a pandemic. He is personally progressive. He blogs about topics like Trump's calamitous presidency and the future of climate change. He also studies disaster history. I jokingly tell my students that my reputation in the department is as Mr. Doom, but once I have earned my PhD, I will officially be Dr. Doom. His Twitter avatar is a plague doctor, a beaked top hat wearing figure who traveled across European towns treating victims of the bubonic plague. Last February, Loeb started stocking up on cans of beans. Last March, he left his office and has not been back since. This April, as the country inched toward half of the population getting a first dose of a vaccine and daily deaths dipped below 1,000, his poems became melancholy. Quote, "When you were young, wise old Aesop tried to warn you about this moment, wherein the plague is the steady tortoise and we are the overconfident hare." Yes, as I continue to point out, a great many people are enjoying this. Also, which I forgot to mention, it was obvious to me from the beginning that if coronavirus was living on exposed surfaces, like tables, doorknobs, the handles for shopping baskets or whatever, then everyone would have been exposed within a matter of weeks. Perhaps it would have been better that way. We would have herd immunity and everyone would be forced to admit it. In a completely unrelated story from Penny Starr at Breitbart, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced that the birth rate in the U.S. fell by 4% in 2020, the largest yearly drop in 5 decades. The rate dropped across every major racial group and in nearly all age groups, falling to the lowest point since the government started tracking the data more than a century ago. The fact that you saw declines in births, even for older moms, is quite striking, the lead author of the study, Brady Hamilton, said in the Guardian report. The outlet further noted that the coronavirus may have contributed to last year's birth rate as people were anxious about having a child during the pandemic. People continued to have children during World War II in Europe. This falling birth rate and falling birth rates elsewhere in the world suggest a surrender, a giving up, a sort of, to hell with it. We are no longer interested in the future. And the Seychelles weighs in. This is from Bloomberg Quint. Seychelles, which has fully vaccinated more of its population against the coronavirus than any other country, has closed schools and canceled sporting activities for 2 weeks as infections surge. The measures, which include bans on the intermingling of households and the early closure of bars, because we know that there's some sort of connection between alcohol and the coronavirus, come even as the country has fully vaccinated more than 60% of its adult population with 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccines. The curbs are similar to those last imposed at the end of 2020. Despite all of the exceptional efforts we are making, the COVID-19 situation in our country is critical right now, with many daily cases reported last week. Peggy Vidot, the nation's health minister, said at a press conference Tuesday. You know, when I see stories like this, I think, don't they suggest that the vaccines are not as efficacious as has been claimed? And let's have a daily look at lockdown skeptics. Canada authorizes use of Pfizer COVID vaccine for children. The first country to do so. Yay, Canada. U.S. regulators are expected to authorize the use of the Pfizer vaccine in the same age group in the coming days. And in the U.K., the NHS is preparing to vaccinate school children from September. The toxicity of some of the chemicals found raises the question of whether face masks are safe to be used on a daily basis. This is from a new peer-reviewed study in the scientific journal Water Research, which has called for a full investigation into face masks as it raises serious questions about their safety for daily use and their impact on the environment. The study, an investigation into the leaching of micro and nanoparticles and chemical pollutants from disposable face masks linked to the COVID-19 pandemic, investigated the impact of disposable plastic face masks on the environment by submerging masks from several different manufacturers in water, then testing the water for chemicals. The researchers found lead, cadmium, antimony, and various plastic and organic substances in the water. They expressed concerns about the contribution disposable face masks are making to the world's plastic problems. While the focus of the study was on the impact on the environment, the authors were clear about the implications of their findings for the safety of masks for public health. They write, quote, "The toxicity of some of the chemicals found and the postulated risk of the rest of the present particles and molecules raises the question of whether disposable masks are safe to be used on a daily basis and what consequences are to be expected after the disposal into the environment," unquote. Lockdown skeptic party wins a resounding victory in Spanish election. Heartening news today. Ahead of Britain's own election tomorrow, the People's Party in Madrid, led by Regional Assembly President Isabel Diaz Ayuso, a very attractive woman, I must say, who campaigned under a freedom banner and who is credited with keeping lockdown restrictions to a minimum in the city, won 65 of the 136 seats available in the assembly. The Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, which is the national governing party, was trounced, receiving just 17% of the vote, leaving it with a record low of just 24 seats, down from 37 2 years ago. Why is the world's most vaccinated nation locking down again? Yes, the Seychelles once more. And why indeed? The government put the surge down to people being less careful, particularly over Easter. However, setting aside whether population behavior is a plausible explanation, this doesn't explain why the vaccines are not preventing transmission or infection. Norway to introduce COVID vaccine passports. Will Britain follow suit? England and Wales see 7th consecutive week of negative excess deaths, but of course the panic and the lockdown must continue despite the numbers. New data from the Office for National Statistics provides an insight into the extent of the damage done to the nation's, that would be Britain's, mental health by a year of lockdowns. Most notably, the percentage of British adults who experienced some form of depression in the first months of 2020 was more than double that recorded before the first lockdown began. Is this a surprise to anyone? Certainly not a surprise to me. And let's go to Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. It's just, I didn't think that it would last this long. You know, I thought that the economy would be wrecked and society would be smashed. And then, you know, particularly after Trump was defeated, they could blame it all on Trump and then say, yeah, we're going to get back to normal now. But you see, They've invested in the panic. So many of the elite and the aspirational people have invested in the panic, and they're not willing to let go. They're like a terrier with a bone. Alex Berenson shows the cover of his upcoming book published by Regnery, which is called Pandemia: How Coronavirus Hysteria Took Over Our Government, Rights, and Lives. There's a Dr. Fauci action figure. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. I got an action figure. Yes, I do. Not as handsome as I am in real life, but not bad. 6 inches tall, almost life-size. Action figure me. Awesome. Buy yours today. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Rochelle Walensky, the head of the CDC, had tweeted, to reach these predicted good outcomes, we need to keep vaccinating people against COVID-19, and we all need to keep practicing prevention interventions like wearing masks and social distancing. Berenson comments, did you ever think you'd be begging for Redfield back? She's no smarter, and at least he didn't think of himself as America's code blue savior. A reminder, this is the woman who, shortly after she took over this job, was almost crying at a press conference talking about how scared she was. Berenson says, sometimes I post these stories from the last year just to remind myself that we're neck deep in it. Thing is, we have been fed so much bullshit over the last 15 months that even keeping track of it requires a supercomputer. If you are a physician seeing cases of teens or young adults with severe MIS or thrombosis following COVID vaccinations, please contact me. Ideally, before the Pfizer shot is approved for 12 to 15-year-olds. I know you are out there. This March 22nd, 2020 paper about ways to make the public accept lockdowns from a British government advisory group may be the most critical document of the entire pandemic. It's all there in black and white. Quote, the perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased, unquote. Quote, communication strategies should provide social approval for desired behaviors. Consideration should be given to use of social disapproval, unquote. They told us exactly what they planned to do, Berenson comments, then they did it. And vaccines are lockdowns on steroids, but Big Brother has 3 problems now. After a year, everyone knows who is at risk and who isn't. All the stories about variants can't change that. Vaccines are even more intrusive than lockdowns, and the side effects are real. I'm going to, well, let's go back to the chat before I return to Hilar Belix, the Serval state. Aslan says Spain has become terminally progtardized. It's sad. You know, I have a hypothesis about that, and it applies both to Ireland and the province of Quebec, that these 3 places were effectively walled off from modernity. And this lasted until the early 1960s in Quebec. And it lasted in Ireland until, the 1980s? And of course, it lasted in Spain until Franco's death in, 1975? My hypothesis is that since the pause was introduced to the rest of the world gradually, this allowed antibodies to develop. People have marveled for the longest time at the complete collapse, almost instant collapse of Spain, Quebec, and Ireland into pausdom, because it was such a shock that it just came over them as a wave, as a gigantic wave, and there seemed to be no defense against it. Tom Anderson says, KMG, it's interesting to note that suicides and commitments to mental institutions plummeted during the world wars. A lot of people found those exciting times. There was a lot of, how would you say, louche behavior going on. I mean, during the middle of the Blitz in London and elsewhere, all fornication and adultery and heavy drinking and drug use. People thought that, and I mean, it wasn't just the bombs. I mean, structures were being fundamentally weakened by the effects of the bombing, and this happened quite often, that people would be walking down the street and there'd be no air raid siren, but then a piece of masonry would fall off the building and smack them on the head, and they're dead, just like that. So I guess if you think that death is near, you're going to try to enjoy life as much as possible. What we see in COVID is not like that at all. This isn't, a threat which passes. Apparently, it is a threat like climate change, and that is no accident, which is permanent. Aslan says fornication comes from the Latin word forno, meaning oven. That's quite good. Laramie Hirsch, hello. When the economy collapses and we are forbidden from eating beef and chicken, the first cannibals will be Democrat voters. Hello to Jaakko Raipala, our Finnish friend. Finland was the same. We spent 50 years appeasing the USSR and building Lenin statues while paying little attention to what was taking over the West. Then the USSR came down and paws flooded in. Well, thank you for that information. Ahead McNeck says, my British friend tried killing herself a week ago. I found out yesterday. She's a true believer in COVID-19 hysteria, but the pressure finally got to her. Aslan says, therapists must be having a field day with COVID. They can set up the call, mute, and go do other stuff while patients vomit out their intimate fantasies. Then they get paid. A relative of ours loved to live in Spain during Franco's reign. Seemed pretty decent to me. I suppose there was more of a cult of personality of Franco in Spain than there was of Salazar in Portugal. Salazar is pretty much my ideal for a leader. I don't really care about the ability to vote if I understand that my country is being run by sober, intelligent people who have our best interests at heart. Aurelia Crack says, if I refuse to take the vaccine, send me to the White Dissidents open air reservation in Idaho. The Shedding Cells, is that another band name? Septia7 says, public health is a communistic idea. Health is something only an individual can have, as there is no individual who resembles the average man, which can be applied to public entity. Okay, let us go. Oh, the West isn't producing because of climate change. You must have run into these people, married couples, or couples who aren't married but are, clearly, established as a couple. Oh, we wouldn't bring children into the world. Well, why not? Oh, there's just so much wrong that's going on. Oh, now compared to the past, there wasn't any bad things going on in the world when you were born. I remember this old joke. In fact, my foster mother put it on a plaque in the kitchen. Having children is hereditary. If your parents didn't have any, neither will you. Yes, your parents and grandparents were selfless enough to keep civilization going, but no, this is just too much. This is too much work for you. Gamian says, I'm just not seeing reports of bad side effects from Sputnik anywhere on the Russian internet that I peruse daily, nor am I seeing people being afraid of it, so the reports could be accurate. I don't know. It's my understanding that Sputnik is essentially the same to several other vaccines. I think during World Wars, people also had something to fight for, which is invigorating, says Tom Anderson. Aslan says you can see Salazar's speeches on YT, and he was a true gentleman. When people have nothing to fight for, can they even continue on living? Seems like not with the plummeting birth rates, says Tom Anderson. So let's go back to the servile state. In other words, by the first third of the 17th century, by 1630 to 40, the economic revolution was finally accomplished, and the new economic reality thrusting itself upon the old traditions of England was a powerful oligarchy of large owners overshadowing an impoverished and dwindling monarchy. Other causes had contributed to this deplorable result. The change in the value of money had hit the crown very hard. The peculiar history of the Tudor family, their violent passions, their lack of resolution and of any continuous policy, and to some extent the character of Charles I himself and many other subsidiary causes may be quoted. But the great main fact upon which the whole thing is dependent is the fact that the monastic lands, or at least a fifth of the wealth of the country, had been transferred to the great landowners, and that this transference had tipped the scale over entirely in their favor as against the peasantry. The diminished and impoverished crown could no longer stand. It fought against the new wealth, the struggle of the civil wars. It was utterly defeated, and when a final settlement was arrived at 1660, you have all the realities of power in the hands of a small, powerful class of wealthy men, the king still surrounded by the forms and traditions of his old power, but in practice a salaried puppet. And in that economic world which underlies all political appearances, the great dominating note was that a few wealthy families had got hold of the bulk of the means of production in England, while the same families exercised all local administrative power and were moreover the judges, the higher education, the church, and the generals. They quite overshadowed what was left of central government in this country. That country being England, of course. Take as a starting point for what followed the date 1700. By that time, more than half of the English were dispossessed of capital and of land. Not one man in two, even if you reckon the very small owners, inhabited a house of which he was the secure possessor, or tilled land from which he could not be turned off. Such a proportion may seem to us today a wonderfully free arrangement, and certainly if nearly one half of our population were possessed of the means of production, we should be in a very different situation from that in which we find ourselves. But the point to seize is that, though the bad business was very far from completion in or about the year 1700, yet by that date England had already become capitalist. She had already permitted a vast section of her population to become proletarian. And is this, and not the so-called Industrial Revolution, a later thing, which accounts for the terrible social condition in which we find ourselves today? How true this is what I still have to say in this section will prove. In an England thus already cursed with a very large proletariat class, and in an England already directed by a dominating capitalist class, possessing the means of production, there came a great industrial development. Had that industrial development come upon a people economically free, it would have taken a cooperative form. Coming as it did upon a people which had already largely lost its economic freedom, it took at its very origin a capitalist form, and this form it has retained, expanded, and perfected throughout 200 years. It was in England that the industrial system arose. It was in England that all its traditions and habits were formed, and because the England in which it arose was already a capitalist England, modern industrialism, wherever you see it at work today, having spread from England, has proceeded upon the capitalist model. It was in 1705 that the first practical steam engine, Newcomen's, was set to work. The life of a man elapsed before this invention was made by Watt's introduction of the condenser into the great instrument of production which has transformed our industry. But in those 60 years, all the origins of the industrial system are to be discovered. It was just before Watt's patent that Hargreaves' spinning jenny appeared. 30 years earlier, Abraham Darby of Colebrook Dale, at the end of a long series of experiments which had covered more than a century, smelted iron ore successfully with coke. Not 20 years later, King introduced the flying shuttle, the first great improvement in the hand loom, and in general, the period covered by such a life as that of Dr. Johnson, born just after Newcomen's engine was first set working and dying 74 years afterwards when the industrial system was in full blast, covers that great transformation of England. A man who as a child could remember the last years of Queen Anne and who lived to the eve of the French Revolution saw passing before his eyes the change which transformed English society and has led it to the expansion and peril in which we see it today. What was the characteristic mark of that half century and more? What did the new inventions give us, the form of a society now known and hated under the name of industrial? Why did the vast increase in the powers of production, in population, and in accumulation of wealth turn the mass of Englishmen into a poverty-stricken proletariat, cut off the rich from the rest of the nation, and develop to the full all the evils which we associate with the capitalist state? To answer that question, an answer almost as universal as it is unintelligent has been given. That answer is not only unintelligent but false, and it will be my business here to show how false it is. The answer so provided in innumerable textbooks and taken almost as a commonplace in our university is that the new methods of production, the new machinery, the new implements, fatally and of themselves developed a capitalist state in which a few should own the means of production and the mass should be proletariat. The new instruments, it is pointed out, were on so vastly greater a scale than the old and were so much more expensive that the small man could not afford them, while the rich man, who could afford them, ate up by his competition and reduced from the position of a small owner to that of a wage earner his insufficiently equipped competitor who still attempted to struggle on with the older and cheaper tools. To this, we are told, the advantages of concentration were added in favor of the large owner against the small. Not only were the new instruments expensive almost in proportion to their efficiency, but especially after the introduction of steam, they were efficient in proportion to their concentration in few places and under the direction of a few men. Under the effect of such false arguments as these, we have been taught to believe that the horrors of the industrial system were a blind and necessary product of material and impersonal forces, and that whatever the steam engine, the power loom, the blast furnace, and the rest were introduced, there fatally would soon appear a little group of owners exploiting a vast majority of the dispossessed. It is astonishing that a statement so unhistorical should have gained so general a credence. Indeed, were the main truths of English history taught in our schools and universities today, were educated men familiar with the determining and major facts of the national past, such follies could never have taken root. The vast growth of the proletariat, the concentration of ownership in the hands of a few owners, and the exploitation by those owners of the mass of the community had no fatal or necessary connection with the discovery of new and perpetually improving methods of production. The evil preceded indirect historical sequence proceeded patently and demonstrably from the fact that England, the seed plot of the industrial system, was already captured by a wealthy oligarchy before the series of great discoveries began. I'll have more to say on this tomorrow. I'll just point out that you've probably read a lot about artificial intelligence and how it's going to transform the workplace. And apparently the middle class is going to get it in the neck again. And it's going to be the fault of artificial intelligence. Well, I'm sure that Belloc would say, no, it's not. It's the effect of globalization, where the 1%, or especially the 1/10 of 1%, own and control everything. And if they decide that people can't eat beef or chicken anymore and will have to eat some chemical concoction instead, or even eat bugs, then apparently they shall have their way. Yes, I wanted to talk about a curious fellow who I first came across a couple of years ago. This is from the James Robinson from the Daily Mail. Not feeling the heat, Sadiq? London mayor repeats his ridiculed habit of wearing a gillet under a blazer as he hits campaign trail with Tory hopeful Sean Bailey closing in on his lead. Sadiq Khan's dowdy gillet under a blazer look was back in the spotlight once again as he hit the campaign trail ahead of tomorrow's London mayoral elections. He just looks absolutely ridiculous. What is he going to tear off his blazer and then he's going to be in superhero mode? The fashion faux pas comes as Conservative candidate Sean Bailey closes in on his rival ahead of tomorrow's big vote. YouGov's final poll before the capital votes puts the London incumbent on 43% in the first round. And this is down 4 points on last month, while Mr. Bailey is up 1 point to 31%. The numbers suggest Khan is on course to win the contest in a second round runoff with Bailey by 59 to 41%. Overall, Khan's lead over Bailey has fallen from 19 points to 12 points. So who is this Sean Bailey fellow? Well, he is the man who is not allowed to fail. I suppose you could call him a racial token, if you like. I'm going to read from his Wikipedia entry. He was born in 1971. He's a British politician who has been a member of the London Assembly since 2016, a member of the Conservative Party. He is the party's candidate for the forthcoming 2021 London mayoral election. Born in North Kensington to a British Jamaican family, Bailey earned a degree in computer-aided engineering from London South Bank University. Yes, and the Conservatives have adopted this fellow. He and his younger brother were raised by his mother and extended family in the absence of his father, who worked as a lorry driver. From the age of about 13, he began to get to know his father, along with a second family his father had started, and became close to his stepsisters and stepbrother. The families are of Jamaican origin. His grandfather came to the UK from Jamaica in 1947 as part of the Windrush generation. Bailey attended Henry Compton School in Fulham and left with 5 CSEs. When he was 12 years old, his mother sent him to join the Army Cadet Force in White City, where he later became a sergeant instructor and stayed in the cadets for another 10 years. After leaving secondary school, Bailey attended Paddington College, where he achieved 2 A-levels and a BTEC. Bailey was the subject of BBC Radio 4 series The House I Grew Up In which he said that he had committed burglary in his youth, and said, "I had a particular group of friends who indulged in a burglary. I had done it with them." Reflecting on gang culture, Bailey commented, "The problem of having estates with names is that people become very territorial. You kind of defend your ends because you don't want your locale to be seen as where the pussies live." Bailey graduated at 27 with a 2.2 in computer-aided engineering. Previously, he worked as a security guard at Wembley Stadium and the London Trocadero to fund his university tuition. He was unemployed for 2 years. Bailey said, "I did bad jobs. I basically worked sweeping factories, delivering beer, and security work." At least 12 members of his peer group spent time in prison. In May 2006, Bailey co-founded My Generation, a charity addressing the social problems that affect struggling young people and their families. It was established shortly before Bailey was selected by the Conservative Party to stand in the recreated Hammersmith constituency. In 2010, The Times reported that Bailey was at the center of allegations that his North Kensington-based charity showed £16,000 worth of spending without any supporting records. Between 2008 and 2009, almost half of the charity's expenditure was on publicity and administration, not direct charitable expenditure. Of the £116,000 charitable expenditure, more than half was spent on travel and subsistence. The charity was closed in 2012 due to financial problems. The charity services were taken over by other charities, including Kids Company, which became the subject of its own scandal, one of the most remarkable in modern British history. You can read about a woman from Iran called Camila Batman Gelidj, or something like that, who looks like a made-up person. She became a very powerful person in England because she was a foreigner and a woman. But back to Sean Bailey. He was selected in an open primary to be the Conservative candidate for Hammersmith in West London. He failed to win the seat at the 2010 general election, achieving a swing of 0.5% from Labour, which was 2 points below the average swing across London. In the run-up to the 2015 general election, Bailey was unsuccessful in attempts to be chosen as the Conservative Party candidate for Kensington, Croydon South, and Uxbridge South and Ruislip. At the 2017 general election, Bailey contested Lewisham, West and Penge, where he finished in second place. His share of the vote declined by 1.1 percentage points compared to 2015. Bailey was a research fellow at the Center for Policy Studies, writing for the Center and for various newspapers, including the Evening Standard, the Times, and the Independent. In 2011, Bailey was appointed as one of David Cameron's ambassadors for the Big Society. In 2012, he became a special advisor to Prime Minister David Cameron on youth and crime, where he was paid a salary of £60,000 as a special advisor. In 2013, he was moved to a part-time role in the Cabinet Office on a 1-year contract and was paid substantially less. The Telegraph published claims he was pushed out of Downing Street by David Cameron's clique of old Etonian aides. In October 2015, Bailey was selected as the third Conservative candidate on the London Assembly top list. Kensington Labour MP Emma Dent Coad provoked controversy after a blog she wrote about Bailey before her election to the House of Commons, which referred to him as, oh dear, a token ghetto boy. Dent Coad quoted former neighbors describing Bailey as a, quote, freeloading scumbag, unquote, and, quote, the most hated man in North Kensington, unquote. She suggested Bailey had been used by the Conservatives and that his public school buddies will drop him like a hot potato if he failed to get elected. Well, that prediction turned out to be untrue. Bailey was subject to racism during his campaign in 2018. Apparently, he's a man who just can't stop running for office despite failure after failure. In October 2018, Bailey was accused of Islamophobia and Hindu-phobia over the contents of a pamphlet entitled No Man's Land, written for the Center for Policy Studies in 2005. In it, Bailey said that celebrating Muslim and Hindu festivals robs Britain of its community and risks turning the country into a crime-ridden cesspool as a result. He claimed that South Asians bring their culture, their country, and any problems they might have with them, but that this was not a problem with the Black community, quote, because we've shared a religion and in many cases a language, unquote. In the pamphlet, Bailey confused the Hindu religion and the Hindi language. James Cleverly, then deputy chair of the Conservative Party, said that Bailey had been misunderstood and would not be sanctioned. In June 2020, following poor polling figures against current mayor Sadiq Khan, the Financial Times reported that some senior Conservatives wished to replace Bailey with another candidate such as Sajid Javid. This was dismissed by ministers, who said that he had the strong personal backing of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So what can we learn from this? Well, that there are certain people who get chosen by the elite, and they will not be allowed to fail, despite their lack of, shall we say, accomplishment. Because this Bailey fellow has failed again and again and again and again and again, and the Conservatives decided that they're going to prop him up. Why? Because he's Black, because his family comes from Jamaica. We've seen similar things with Conservatives in Canada. There was a Black senator appointed by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and this all ended in tears. He was an acclaimed youth leader. It turned out he was a serial sexual predator of young women. But the Conservatives, well, they never learn. I don't think they're ever going to learn, which is another reason why you do not want to be a Conservative. Another story from the Daily Mail by Joe Tweedy. The father of one of the UK's youngest transgender children insists that his 4-year-old son has never been a girl from birth. Matthew Stubbings and wife Clara Janes, both 44, from Doncaster, say their son Stormy, who was born a twin and assigned female gender at birth, first began showing signs of identifying as male at just 18 months old. Stormy's father said his son hated pigtails and dresses or even pretty shoes, and at the age of 2.5 told his family, "I'm not a girl, I think I'm a boy." However, he says the family have faced a struggle getting some adults to accept Stormy's decision, with many still insisting on calling him a girl. Yeah, how about that? 4 years old. Matthew, a divisional manager of a highways maintenance company, told his story in a post on LinkedIn, urging people to accept others for who they are in life, sharing a photo of Stormy with a new short and spiky haircut. In his post, the South Yorkshire dad said, "This is one of my sons, a bright, happy boy who loves his life. What many people don't know is that he was sexed as a girl. His gender identity, what's in his head, doesn't match his physical sex." I would suggest that naming your child Stormy, regardless of the child's sex, is setting the child on the road to disaster. What can be done about this? Well, all efforts must be made to sanction the medical profession But here we have the Daily Mail buying the whole gender affirming nonsense and encouraging us to think kindly of a horrible man, a wicked man who is determined to wreck the life of one of his children. And these people must be called out publicly and privately. I just can't, one finds himself in situations where, oh, here's so and so, and you're supposed to say hello to so and so. Well, you're not. It's not necessary that you do so. Politeness has its limits. And when we are dealing with wicked people determined not only to wreck the lives of their children, but to wreck society as a whole, there's no need for us to be polite to these people under any circumstances. Speaking of which, speaking of pause and how it is communicated, Fred Watson Jr. writes in the American Sun, the left loves to talk about the path of progress as a never-ceasing arc of history. There is a linear progression to everything. One is either on the right side of history or an evil obstacle to inevitable progress. This is a hustle, as Gaetano Mosca noted, and you will recall that we discussed Mosca at great length in our discussion of James Burnham's The Machiavellians. Mosca noted that most of the rationale of democracy promoters is tied up in the inevitability of it all. There is always another group for power to fight, as we have seen since the gay victory turned into a trans fight, but is it inevitable? What we are seeing now in the fight on the left is proof that it is not linear. The left has nearly completed a paradigm shift. Thomas Kuhn took a wrecking ball to the idea that science is an incremental linear development and insisted it is a mass of competing stories where one wins out, explains the world better, and causes a paradigm shift. How does his approach fit here? Not as much with the stories as with how the old stories died. Often they just died out as practitioners and scientists died out, so no one was left to tell the older explanation. Many times, those who held on to the older story were just uninvited from conferences and not given any voice in journals and publications any longer. I have long believed that Kuhn, who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that this is a global truth. It's not that good ideas displace bad ideas. It is that the people with the supposed bad ideas die off or are simply ignored. In media and online, we see the fight on the left happening daily. A natural progression for the old left would have been single payer or other economic programs to tax the 1% who have reached wealth holdings last seen in the 1920s. That would have been the natural progression from the New Deal to the Great Society to Obamacare to the 20s. It is not happening. And the rejection of the Bernie 16 program for woke social policies is. This is the shift. The story that justifies the current coalition and ruling clique is bio-Leninism. Bio-Leninism was always there waiting to be used, but the situation was not right. What happened is the McGovern coalition of 72 that was destroyed in Nixon's landslide victory did not have the voting muscle nor the decades of funding and spread to give it critical mass. Foundations like Ford had to build the chairs and faculty posts in colleges. Those colleges had to indoctrinate more students who washed in like the tide as our economy shifted towards minting mind workers. The body politic needed millions of different special interest groups to cater to, organize with, and fund for later use. All through the 80s and 90s, the Democrats needed to reorient towards a pro-growth and not as left socially platform. The Democrat Leadership Council was started with massive donations from finance and business interests with this exact idea in mind. They sought politicians like Al Gore, Richard Gephardt, and President Bill Clinton who could present as heartlanders and push through a safe enough message and pro-growth policies to win. Bill Clinton's 1992 Sister Souljah moment was the quintessential DLC move. Today, Democrats cannot even push back on Black Lives Matter without risking ostracism and denunciation. The Bernie class-based analysis crowd is losing and, in fact, have lost already. Their old story of anti-capitalism or anti-elitism is now found on the right. Want to fight monopolies, want to fight faceless corporate power, join the right. The left's dominant story and narrative is an anti-white race-based program. It is the glue that holds it all together. Each hiring of a race-focused or ethno-narcissist writer places pushers of this story into positions that matter. Where are the class-based left-wing writers? They are on Substack, tweeting into the void and hoping for grants and money to come their way from somewhere. This also reveals why canceling on the left is so useful. As Kuhn wrote of scientists no longer invited to conferences and select councils, canceling removes class-based analysts and writers from positions of power over policy and narrative. They get replaced by adherents to the new woke narrative. The 1% loves this because it divides the low and middle to remove any threats. The other problem is the same ideological indoctrination on the masses who went through the university system also washed all over the professional managerial class that occupies positions of power that administer the system for the 1%. There are no brakes on this train, and with each canceling of a class-based lefty and retirement of an old Democrat, the system gets more pure. It gets more totalitarian. It also gets crazier. Now, any criticism, even from the left on policy, is considered a betrayal of woke ideas and cause for removal. The last to get it will be the center-left individuals and class-based thinkers who still think they are on the same team as the woke. The shift has occurred. A cultural revolution sponsored by Citigroup, Google, and Amazon should clue them in that the arc that they assumed would happen has jumped train tracks and is racing down an identity-based path to ethnic strife. They'd have to defect for any chance to get on the old track. That may be impossible. Anyone reading this has seen their other tweets and essays. The defectors would have to throw in their lot with people who do not wear masks outdoors. That is an excellent essay by Fred Watson Jr., which appeared in the AmericanSun.com on May the 4th. I want to talk about structural sexism. This is from an essay by William Briggs. Two academic non-males have invented, or at least giving a good workout to the neologism structural sexism, maybe because structural racism has been so lucrative to academic careers. You recall structural racism is defined as the racism that the debased wished existed so that they could claim racism, but which isn't there, but they still want to say racism, so they say this. Same thing with structural sexism. Whites bad, white men baddest. One example of the term is in the peer-reviewed paper, When Religion Hurts, Structural Sexism and Health in Religious Congregations by Patricia Homan and Amy Burdett in the journal American Sociological Review. These non-males say that because perfect equity does not exist everywhere in all things, structural sexism exists, and that this persistent gender inequality in large-scale social institutions is only one manifestation of a discriminatory gender system, which means there are more manifestations than this one, though they don't say what form those manifestations take. Maybe they just like saying manifestation. Anyway, just like with structural racism, you cannot find, not even with the most meticulous searching, any large or even medial-scale institution that does not go out of its way to reward blacks and persons of color just for being their race, as I pointed out the case of Sean Bailey. The same thing is true for giving perks to non-males, with one big exception: religion. Structural non-equity exists in religion. For instance, the Catholic Church will still not allow men to become nuns, the bigots. Muslims are even more discriminating. They read Christian scripture too, but they implement some of it better. Like when St. Paul said, "Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law." Well, Muslims believe that. Gender scholars, or non-male gender scholars say, have long explored the contours and consequences of gender inequality in the United States, but the measurement of structural sexism and its health consequences is a relatively recent development. So they set about measuring it. And believe you me, it takes a gender scholar to do this, meaning because, as our non-male gender scholars admit, individuals may not directly perceive structural sexism. It takes experts. Where to start? With observable feelings, naturally enough. Also cellular aging and such like things. all of which caused diligent scholars to focus on the dark side of religion, like the nasty health effects of threatening beliefs about the devil. That's a quote, by the way, direct quote, threatening beliefs about the devil. We therefore ask the following research questions. Yes, research questions. 1, is attending a sexist religious institution that excludes women from power and leadership associated with health among women and men? 2, if so, how does the health of attendees at inclusive religious institutions and sexist religious institutions compare to that of individuals who do not regularly participate in organized religion? You may laugh at the idiocy of the first question, but consider this scenario. A female Catholic parishioner screams, "I'm going to hold my breath until you make me a priest." She passes out. She undergoes cellular aging. She has observable feelings. It can happen. The church could remove the possibility of these observable feelings by giving into equality and letting the woman become a priestess. It came close when it ordained James Martin. Yet the church retains its adamantine grip on inequality, insisting as it does that men are not women and women are not men. The scenario, as I spell it out, is at least makes the questions posed measurable. The cause can be tied to the effect. Alas, that can't be said for the way our two non-male gender scholars attacked the problem. What they did was look at some surveys done for other reasons, tying questions about religion to questions about health. And then they performed a maneuver scientists call making shit up. Yeah, of course, women are, they're not very high on the intersectional totem pole. They have been surpassed by trans people. Yes. Remember when feminism was feared? Remember when it seemed that feminism would sweep all before it? Now, actual women are being lectured about what it means to be a woman by trans people. So, feminism, not so powerful, which I suppose we should be happy about, but considering what replaced it. William Briggs had an essay last week, which I read at some length, saying that he thought that there was a breaking point coming in America, that white people in America can only be demonized so much, that can only be gaslighted, that apparently blacks are afraid of them, whereas it is very much the other way around. Well, perhaps it's beginning. This is Jesse O'Neill in the New York Post. A diner pulled a gun on armed Black Lives Matter protesters when they stormed the outdoor area of an upscale Louisville restaurant on the day of the Kentucky Derby. The demonstrators were marching to Churchill Downs to demand justice for Breonna Taylor, who was shot dead by local cops in a botched drug raid last year. Footage of the incident, tweeted by a reporter at the newspaper, shows Saturday's armed confrontation at La Chasse. Some protesters intervened and urged the demonstrators to move away from the man who drew a gun, and police arrived a short time later, the paper reported. A restaurant worker told police that multiple armed protesters entered the restaurant property, which included outdoor dining space. During the encounter, both patrons and protesters brandished firearms, police spokeswoman Alicia Smiley said. 5 protest-related arrests were made, including a suspect charged with possession of a handgun by a convicted felon and first-degree wanton endangerment of an officer. It is legal to carry handguns in Kentucky. No gun violence was reported. The incident comes a week after federal investigators announced a sweeping constitutional rights probe of the beleaguered department in the wake of Taylor's shooting death. More than 230 cops have either retired, resigned, or been fired since 2020. So Black Lives Matters and its allies have decided that it's a very good idea to invade restaurants, indoors or outdoors, people carrying bullhorns, and shout obscenities and racial insults at white people. As the Louisville incident suggests, white people may have come to a breaking point where apparently, in addition to everything else, I can't go out and enjoy a meal without being harangued, without being threatened, without being, the victims of assault by Black Lives Matter. And in Derek Chauvin update news, attorney Eric Nelson has filed a motion for a new trial for former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who was convicted of murdering George Floyd last month. Nelson claims the court violated Chauvin's constitutional rights for several reasons, including not allowing the trial to move outside of Hennepin County and not sequestering the jury the entire time. He also says the jury committed misconduct and wants a hearing to throw out the verdict. Attorney Joe Tamburino, who is not affiliated with Chauvin's case, said the odds of him getting a new trial are very low. Quote, it appears that when it comes to this alleged juror misconduct, Derek Chauvin is asking for the verdict to be thrown out, Tamburino said. Obviously, the defense is under the gun. They have 14 days to do a motion for a new trial. Yes, all the legal experts are telling us that no, that can't happen. I want to talk about a woman who I've discussed on this live stream before, and she is amusingly and accurately named Jennifer Weiner. She born in 1970. She is described as an American writer, television producer, and journalist. She is based in Philadelphia. Her debut novel, published in 2001, was Good in Bed. Her novel, In Her Shoes, was made into a movie starring Cameron Diaz, Toni Collette, and Shirley MacLaine. Now, this woman has, I don't like to make fun of people because of their looks or their weight, except when these people make it an issue. And Jennifer Weiner has become a professional fat person. I did an image search. You know, whenever I come across someone for the first time, particularly a woman who's expressing opinion, I do an image search because it's almost an iron law that sensible women tend to be good looking, much better looking than unsensible women. And I saw various pictures of Jennifer Weiner, and I could see that she was conspicuously overweight. And I saw one particular picture of her in which she was so grossly overweight that it looked like those mock-up boards at the county fair where there's a painting of a man and a woman dressed as farmers or whatever, and you stick your head through. Or there's, the fat man version, the fat lady version of that. I saw this picture of her where she is wearing an orange crocheted top. And I thought this was obviously a cruel right-wing or anti-feminist parody. And then I discovered that it is not. The source of it is People magazine from December the 3rd, 2020, which is not all that long ago. Jennifer Weiner on keeping kids entertained. The idea that we have to enrich their every moment is a new one. Okay, well, that sounds sensible enough. But we have a piece by Jennifer Weiner, who was the author of the upcoming novel That Summer, in the New York Times today. And the New York Times, at an op-ed section, it is so grossly personal. And it's just people complaining about various aspects of their lives or blaming everything bad that happens to them on Donald Trump. But Jennifer Weiner writes in the Times, perhaps you've heard someone bemoan the quarantine 15 that they gained during lockdown, or their struggles to flatten the curve of a body that looks different after a year inside. It was inevitable. The pandemic has made us more sedentary, and many of us have sought comfort in eating. We are languishing, as Adam Grant wrote recently, living in the void between depression and flourishing, the absence of well-being. And where there's insecurity and unhappiness, there are companies looking to make money. Yes, there are indeed. So here come the weight loss profiteers, the misery merchants dressed up as purveyors of wellness. Now, when you go to the New York Times website and you look at the headshot of Jennifer Weiner, which I suspect is a rather old one, one doesn't learn a salient fact about her, that she is morbidly obese. And this isn't the first piece that she has written attacking weight loss companies. She says they're looking to make some back, whatever money they missed out on during 2020, and then some. In a normal year, the weight loss business ramps up in January and goes strong through spring and into summer. Last year was not normal. There was stress snacking and procrastinating. Procrastinating. There was no shedding for the wedding. Oh, the internal rhyme. That's even better after the procrastinating, baking. Okay. Yes. We know all about the things that were canceled. So apparently the U.S. diet industry lost 21% of its value in 2020. Was that dip matched by concurrent weight gain among Americans who suddenly couldn't make it into their weekly weigh-ins or stock up on their meal replacement shakes? Depends whose data you believe. Yes, indeed, it does. Now she is saying here that, smart scales, hybrid smartwatches, and smart thermometers found that people actually lost weight in 2020. So do you think, Jennifer Weiner, that the people who have paid good money for so-called smart scales, hybrid smartwatches, and smart thermometers are the type of people who are liable to be thin or fat? Keep in mind, Jennifer Weiner, of the status difference between thinness and fatness in the United States. So based on this highly questionable data, she comes to the conclusion, despite talking about the quarantine 15 at the very beginning of this essay, that no one's gained weight because of COVID-19. Does she ever walk out onto the street to see what people look like now? Oh, and so corporate entities have been joined by freelance skulls, the people who are not going to miss a chance to feel superior to the friendly neighborhood fatties. Magazines are full of diet app roundups. Here is the famous physician wagging her finger at Krispy Kreme for offering free donuts to the vaccinated. My Twitter feed is suddenly full of ads for intermittent fasting apps on Instagram. It's wall-to-wall shapewear and fat shredding supplements. You know, it's funny. Yes, I get targeted ads sent to me, which I ignore them almost completely. But it would seem that Jennifer Weiner is obsessed with her weight, despite the disclaimers she makes later on. Then there's a Facebook friend who really wants to talk about the keto diet, or keto, however it's pronounced, or Optavia, or the Beachbody plan, and would be happy to bring me into the fold. You can consume a lot of this marketing without ever hearing the words weight or diet or calories. The diet industry has gotten impressively subtle, even as it's incessantly in your face. Well, it's certainly incessantly in Jennifer Weiner's face. Everybody knows that diets don't work in the long term. Buzzwords like wellness and strength have replaced diet and calories. It's all about being the best you can be, a you that is significantly thinner than the you right now. I have one word for you: resist. As we should all know by now, diets don't work. Studies show that 41% of dieters gain back more weight over the next 5 years than they lost. 41%. So 41% from 100% leaves what? That leave 59%. There's nothing wrong with taking action to improve your health. Want to add more fruits and vegetables to your diet or get back to regular workouts? Go for it. Go outside now that we can do that again, but you don't need to enroll in a program, download an app, or buy frozen meals to do any of this. After everything we've endured, and as the crisis still rages around the world, each of us should cherish the body that got us through it, rather than punish it for failing to fit into last year's skinny jeans. Well, it's really no business of mine how much Jennifer Weiner weighs or that she is morbidly obese, except that she has made it my business by whining about herself in the pages of the New York Times. Now, there's no mention in this essay that obesity, particularly morbid obesity, is pretty much at the top of the fabled comorbidities, which is going to lead one to die from COVID-19. Now, Jennifer Weiner, I've seen many different pictures of her, and at some point, not all that long ago, she was significantly thinner than she is today. So what happened such that she got morbidly obese? Apparently, she's been condemned to be this shape. But on the other hand, each of us should cherish the body that got us through the crisis. None of it makes sense. This is the very worst kind of special pleading. And if people took Jennifer Weiner's advice about weight, more people would get sick and many more people would die. But no, it's all about making Jennifer Weiner feel good about herself. Let's have a final look at the chat. Aslan says American Death Style. Brandon Smith says it's not about diet, it's about being too lazy to exercise. Well, I've quoted this before. This was from Doonesbury, 40 years ago, when Jane Fonda was establishing herself as a fitness guru, that she was holding a press conference. And she says, after 20 years, I finally discovered how to lose weight and stay fit. What's that? She says, eat less, exercise more. And a reporter says, it took you 20 years to discover that. And Jane Fonda says, male doctors hid the truth from me. Let's see. Ogan's Iron says, probably just calculate hours and tell you have 3 hours and 45 minutes before you can eat. Diet matters much more than exercise for weight, says Ogan's Iron. This woman is morbidly obese because she eats massive amounts of calories. Well, yes, this is clearly true. I mean, she would have to be, I don't know, like a professional athlete in order to consume the amount of calories she's clearly consuming and not blow up like a balloon. I would think, again, when you were as big as this woman is, when are the times that you are not eating? Don Will said, when faced with oncoming health issues, I lost 125 pounds and have never looked back. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Chogakin 666 says carb bloat is real. It's an interesting thing, the war on meat. Beef and chicken are excellent foods to eat. They're sources of fat and protein. Carbohydrates are bad for one to eat. And this excess consumption of fruits and vegetables, which the fruit and vegetable cartels, foisted on governments decades ago, we are not eating the way that we have eaten in the past. And let's say I'm going to put, 1945 as a dividing line. The reason for the obesity crisis is because people are not only eating too much and not exercising enough, that they are eating the wrong things. Why are they targeting tobacco but promoting marijuana, says Tom Anderson? Because of urban pacification. Tobacco stimulates the mind, whereas marijuana dulls it. In fact, tobacco provides a mild euphoria. It makes it possible for people to work harder and longer. Brandon Smith says water only and animal products is a good starting point. I wonder if Jennifer Weiner drinks so-called diet drinks. I know that Trump does. This is a very bad idea. Trump knows it's a bad idea. He said this in public. He says that diet colas and the like are an attempt to trick your body into believing that you're actually getting food, and you're not getting food. And what they do to your body is your body starts screaming, I need food. In the same way that these diet snacks, again, it's an attempt to cheat the body. That apparently eating corn syrup is going to make us thinner. Let's see, finding a specific YT personality to follow daily really helps. Okay. YouTube fitness time. Diet soda is the new smoking, says Brandon Smith. Bacon and eggs all week was always a great way for me to lose 5 pounds to 10 pounds in 1 week, says Ogan's Iron. Don Willis says, watch carbs, watch sugars, stay active, problem solved. Sodas will destroy your teeth, says Aslan. Yes, diets don't work. Well, they don't work for some people, but they work for others. I mean, there's some people who want to lose a lot of weight in a short period of time, which is, stressful on the body. But of course, diets work. Of course, diets work. When people are put into prisons or concentration camps and they're put on starvation rations, they lose weight, don't they? And they keep that weight off, don't they? These people like Jennifer Weiner are attempting to tell us that there is no relationship between calorie consumption and weight. It's demented. Tom Anderson says, I only eat organic. Hang on, I have to close this. Organic beef, dairy, eggs, and organic russet potatoes. Okay, diet sodas are far less harmful than, what is this, HFCS? Nobody gets between her and her overindulgences. Well, you know, I suppose that the natural reaction to her enormous weight gain would be shame, right? But no, it has to become projection. There is nothing wrong with me. There is something wrong with you. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite, well, it just got under the wire for the last century. There's not very many films made like this anymore. It's called Go from 1999, directed by Doug Liman, with an excellent cast in it, exceedingly well written and plotted, and with a great music score. On the book club on Friday, I'm going to be discussing an excellent book by Tom Holland, the successor to his book Rubicon. It's about the fall of the House of Caesar, and it's called Dynasty. And on Music Monday, on May the 10th, I'm going to talk about a cult figure in music and long a favorite of mine, Syd Barrett. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. So if you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be greatly, greatly appreciated at this time, due to my current circumstances, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are Canadian, money can be sent directly to me as a donation via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. Oh, yes, and final comment from Tom Anderson. Polyunsaturated fatty acids, vegetable, are just as bad as corn syrup. Yes, and the experts, the nutritional experts, starting in the 1950s, decided that, oh, no, everything you know about fat is wrong. No, you need to cook in this rather than that. It's just absolutely disastrous advice from the experts, the dietitians, the medical professional. I never once heard an apology from them. But as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.